How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. A while back, I made this diorama set in the wild imaginary west with a long-legged mech in a swamp. This week, I built an accompanying diorama with a monster that would live in that swamp. And it's not Shrek. I started by peeling the paper off of some foam core, and I cut 2 layers out of the paperless foam core to the size of my wooden base. I then traced out a pond shape onto the foam using a pencil, and I cut out the shape of the pencil line with a fresh X-Acto knife. I tilted the blade as I cut the foam to create a slope toward the center of the pond. Once I had popped out the inside shape of the foam, I glued the 2 layers together with some foam-safe superglue. I rounded off the hard angle all around the shore with my hobby knife for gluing the foam down to the wood. Foam-safe superglue is a fairly recent addition to my glue collection, and it has quickly risen to the top of my frequently used glue list. After that, I mixed up some plaster, paint, and Mod Podge to create a terrain paste. I then applied it to the base with a popsicle stick, and I spread it around with my gloved finger. I made sure to fill any potential gaps and smooth it out. Once all the paste was on, I hit it with some hot air from a hairdryer, which I stopped doing pretty quickly because I remembered it could cause cracks. Instead, I left it to air dry. And while it was drying, I hopped on Hero Forge and I made a base model for my monster. I then downloaded the file, brought it over to Nomad Sculpt on the iPad to make some customizations of my own. I then printed it out, and I wasn't entirely happy with the size. It was a tad bit too small, so I scaled it up till it reached a size I was happy with. I wanted this monster to look like it was wading through the pond, so I cut off its feet just above the ankles using a Dremel and a cutoff wheel. I wore a respirator while doing this to abide by one of the key rules of hobby timing: don't inhale resin. I'll keep these lucky little Bigfoot feet around to use in future projects, maybe a Wizard of Oz crossover. At this point, the paste on the base had dried, so it was time to add some texture. I brushed some tacky glue around the edge, and then I sprinkled on some sand. I then sprayed it with isopropyl alcohol, and I applied some watered down white glue. Isopropyl alcohol breaks the surface tension of the glue, which helps it grab onto the sand a lot better. I finished it off with a very fine powdery sand, and then I left it to fully dry. Once it had fully dried, I took the base and the skunk ape outside to prime. For the painting of this skunk ape, I decided on the classic Cruella de Vil and molasses look from Disney's 1996 Dalmatians featuring Glenn Close. I actually did go on to paint it like a green mossy Bigfoot, but unfortunately I lost most of that footage because it was out of focus. I painted the pond to look like a pond, making the water in the deepest part of the pond the darkest and the outside lighter and greener. I applied a brown wash to the earth around the pond, and I stuck down some tufts of grass. After those tufts were in place, I glued down the skunk ape, and it was time to pour the resin. I mixed up equal parts resin and resin hardener, and I stirred in some black, green, blue, and brown pigments. I've been asked about resin coloring recipes, and I don't really follow recipes or have any recipes. I just add colors till it looks good. I then poured the resin into the pond using a popsicle stick to help keep large bubbles from forming. I used a toothpick to help the resin spread out flat around the shore, and I popped the bubbles with a creme brulee torch, being extra careful not to burn my grass tufts. After the bubbles were all popped, I covered it and I left it to cure. 24 hours later, I removed the cover and I was happy to see that it had cured properly with no bugs or dust. I did the back of the paintbrush test to make sure that it wasn't tacky before moving on with all the finishing touches. I made up the back of the paintbrush test just now. I felt like the diorama wouldn't be complete without a human, so I decided on this little guy in a boat. I know it doesn't look quite right to have a guy in a boat in a tiny pond like this, but I have a good explanation. This guy had been portaging his little boat across the swampy wetlands and lakes when nightfall came. The only dry place he could find to sleep was his little boat. Early the next morning, he was awakened by a terrible smell. Skunk apes are essentially big feet that live in swamps and are known for their nasty smell that follows them wherever they go, hence the name Skunk Ape. The ground around the diorama was not green enough, so I added some flocking and I tried to avoid getting it on the resin. Skunk apes in this universe are very large and slow-moving, like giant sloths. The locals can navigate the wetlands with relative safety and avoid the monsters because of their slow movement. They tend to avoid humans and eat mostly plants or dead things that can't run away from them. They are opportunists and won't let a chance for fresh food go to waste. They are willing to expend a little bit of energy if a meal is within an arm's reach. I then got out some Mod Podge. This is the Gloss Lustre edition. I added it to the surface of the pond so it didn't look perfectly still. The second to last thing to do was to glue the boat in place, and our little friend here was in for his terrible surprise.
Hi there.
I finished off the sides with black 3.0, and I called it good. Here is the Wild Western collection so far, excluding the town and a couple of the resin builds. I am having so much fun with this series. It's definitely not over. I will continue to be making these for a while. I also have other plans for this universe, hopefully outside of YouTube, so stay tuned for that. If you have suggestions for monsters or things you would like to see added to this universe, please continue to leave those comments below. I do try to read all of them. Otherwise, that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.